This is Justin Roebuck. I'm the Ottawa County Clerk, and we are conducting the public test for the May 3rd election, May 3, 2022, here in the city of Hudsonville. So this is an encrypted USB flash drive, and all it is just data. It's the data for this particular election, and what we're doing is installing that in the USB port. We have another device, which is basically a security key, so it's doing like a security handshake with the equipment. And this device is not necessarily, this is something that we'll take with us after we perform the test. So the election workers in the precinct don't have this security key device. So we're installing that just as a verification that it is indeed this May 3rd election. And it's going to ask me for a code, and I'll kind of step around here and I'll enter that code. So we can remove this now. And that V drive USB device stays inserted in the tabulator the entire time through this process. So we use the security key for different functions. One is to zero out the results of the election after the test. So obviously we're going to run a series of ballots on here. We want to make sure that it's completely cleared before we close things up. So basically right here I'm selecting the precinct from this list. So we have an entire list of every jurisdiction and every precinct with an election. And I'm going to select the just want to make sure I'm selecting the right one. There we go. Ward 1, there it is. City of Hudsonville, Ward 1, Precinct 1, Ward 2, Precinct 1. We're going to go ahead and assign that to this device. So this is kind of, I think, the point where I picked up from the, like on the Facebook video. Oh, thanks. All right. So what we're doing here is basically we're going to run a series of test ballots through this device. We're going to start by printing out the zero report. So the equipment is going to verify that beginning this test, and obviously beginning on election day, everything is zero. There are no vote totals contained on the memory device here. And that's what you can see that's printing out here. Now on election day, this is exactly the same procedure that our election workers will use. So our precinct workers will come in, they'll turn the device on, and it will have that print zero report, and then they're going to sign that, verifying that everyone present in the precinct on election day witnessed that the totals tape was zero. So now we're opening the polls, and that's an important step too, because basically that zero report has to print out before you can even open the polls. So you can't even get to the point where you're inserting ballots until that happens. Step around here, enter the open polls code. And so the ballots that we're running through are a series of test ballots. Some are correctly marked, some are incorrectly marked. So for example, this one is marked with a yes and a no vote. And we're doing that on purpose, obviously, to determine whether or not the equipment is going to recognize that error and notify a voter if that same error were to occur on election day. So you can see now we've opened the polls. It says ready for use. It has an image there showing the voters how they would insert the ballot. And then I'm going to go ahead and insert this first test ballot here. And it's doing exactly what we want it to do, right? It is saying, wait a minute, there are too many choices marked on this ballot. And it's identifying that error to the voter. It's communicating back to the voter. Now, if I were a voter in the precinct on election day, I could take my ballot back and what we call spoil the ballot and get a new ballot issued and then correct that mistake. But for the purposes of this test, we're going to go ahead and cast the ballot. So that vote is not going to count. And that's another thing we have to verify, that a ballot marked like that is not going to produce a total. This is a blank ballot. Same kind of theory there, right? We don't want, we want the machine to recognize that. It did that. We also want to make sure that it doesn't put anything in the totals column for that ballot. So you have a couple of blank ballots here. No choices. And this is what we call the wrong precinct ballot. So if you notice, we started up the equipment. This is for the city of Hudsonville precincts 1 and 2, or wards 1 and 2. This is a Ward 3 ballot. So another thing we're testing is to make sure that a ballot from a different precinct is not going to count in this device. So we'll set that aside because that's not going to go through. This ballot is what we call a stray mark ballot. It's also got a marking through the barcode there. And that's also going to produce an error telling us your choices may not be properly marked. There are no choices on the ballot. So again, what we're trying to identify is that a ballot marking made within the target area is not going to count unless it's in that yes or no box. This ballot's correctly marked. That's always good. So one of the elements of this test is also to get a different total. So for the yes total and the no total, the state requirement is for those totals to be a different number. So we have to mark a certain number of ballots yes and a certain number of ballots no. All right. So this is a total of 7 ballots. And what I'm going to do now is close the polls, and that's going to produce the result, the totals tape rather, after we select the close polls option. There's a little button on the back here that we press that allows the election workers to perform certain tasks on the equipment. One of those, of course, being closing the polls. Now it's going to ask me if I'm sure, because it's recognizing it's too early to close the polls. And this is another security feature on this device that obviously in the precinct on election day, it will also ask election workers. And what's interesting is there's a different security code required to close the polls early. That is not a code that we release to the election inspectors. And so that's just another way of authenticating and putting those checks and balances into the process. So this is asking me for an administrative password. I'm going to go ahead and enter that. And we'll close the polls and see what we have here for our result. So on election day, we actually print a number of totals tapes, and this equipment is designed to do that. For our purposes here today, we only need 1, but it will print a number of totals tapes, and I'm just going to go ahead and cancel those. So on election day, the totals actually go to various places. 1 to the county clerk, 1 to the probate judge, 1 to the local clerk. And then we have our totals here listed out. And the equipment, the totals tape is also going to tell us the number of ballots that did not count. So we have the Hudsonville Schools operating millage renewal. The number of votes for yes was 2. The number of votes for no was 1. We did have 3 undervotes and 1 overvote, so that identifies with the ballots that we placed in the machine as well. And I don't know, do we have the chart of predetermined results? So one of the things that are requirements under election law is to produce what we call a chart of predetermined results. So along with the marked test ballots is this chart essentially saying, ballot number 1 is an overvote, ballot number 2 an undervote, and so forth. The totals marked here have to match the totals that are on this totals tape. And so you can see here on the chart 2 in the yes column and 1 in the no column, and that is correct according to the totals tape. So, and this test is performed after every single, or prior to every single election. So as we program the equipment, we're out in the field conducting these tests, and it's important that this process is followed. It's actually a public meeting, so anyone from the public can join and watch this process and see how it plays out. Definitely an important part of the pre-election process for us.